Vice President of Number Information Services at XConnect. We have quite a lot of questions to get through, so I guess I'll just start with the first one. Can you tell me more about how you authenticate data for businesses?
Hi, and good morning. Thanks very much. Kind of to set the context, businesses communicating with all of their users, their subscribers or whatever, in a vastly widening range of ways. We're all familiar with web pages and chat and email and WhatsApp's being used, and people make calls and people use SMS. And I think it's interesting that the last two remain pretty much dominant, really, because everybody has a phone. And the key remains the phone number. It's global, universally recognized. So the role that we play is we provide a range of services that focus on those phone numbers. Is that number that you've been given to communicate with your customer or subscriber or whatever a legitimate number? Is it authentic? Is it actually reachable? You've got to make sure that it's not a ghost number or a risky number. And the way these things are used, these services are used, is that businesses will query us in real time. Here is a number, and we tell them if it's recognized, if it's been allocated, if it's reachable, and we do that globally and at scale. We'll check about 50 billion numbers this year, and we have data centers spread out around the globe, Dublin, Frankfurt, Mumbai, Singapore, Sao Paulo. So our job is really to provide authoritative data. We have the job of sort of finding the master reference data. Often, actually, there's no such thing. But so our job is to cross-reference and to identify authentic and legitimate, and use the multiple sources to generate a clear picture of the usage of a particular phone number.
Okay, and just in regards to that then, so in regards to transparency, how do you ensure how do you go about compiling and verifying the information with regards to update frequency or data sources?
Well, it's an interesting challenge because there's no one place to go, or I should say we become that one place to go. But in terms of sourcing that data, there's a hierarchy of sources. In general, you usually get the national regulator who knows sort of a block of numbers and whether they're allocated to a particular operator. Then there's usually a national administration of some sort that's responsible for number portability. So they're handling moves between networks at an individual number level. Okay. And then at the third level of that hierarchy, you've really got the network operators themselves. And they're obviously going to know the status of an individual number, those numbers that they're responsible for. So our job is to bring that all together, cross-reference it, monitor and track the changes, and make sure that what we're told makes sense. By the way, it doesn't always. We have to do a great deal of sanity checking to ensure that these systems are really giving us consistent and correct information. We typically see about 20,000 changes each month to number blocks, and we see millions of changes a day to individual numbers. Each country is a little bit different. But we know about most of the changes within the networks within about 24 hours. So we also have the ability that if an application needs to know the status right now, this minute or second, we have additional services that query APIs from the operators, and that can give us real-time updates. So it's really everywhere from real-time through to 24-hour data, through to sort of number block information, which is typically about every week you're going to see those things updated.
Okay, and how does XConnect help how do your services help in the fight against fraud?
Well, as we all know, the fraudsters are extremely creative, and they use every trick in the book, and quite a few that aren't in the book as well. But there are a couple of types of categories that dominate, I guess. Identity fraud is one aspect. Another is traffic inflation, really the creation of additional traffic that isn't actually legitimate. But these two classes, although they sound quite different, do tend to go hand in hand. The difference is that impersonation tends to hit the individual, and traffic inflation tends to hit the business, the business user who really who's the person usually paying for this. One of the most damaging examples of this has been around automated systems that create huge numbers of accounts. They're generating SMS notifications, and in some cases these can be sent to dummy numbers, or worse still, they get sent to premium rate numbers, which gives the fraudster kind of a double payback. It's putting money from the premium rate revenue share, and it's also creating a false identity, which is why I kind of suggest these two frauds are very closely linked. There are some very basic things, though, that you can do, and by validating the numbers that are being requested for callback or account creation or whatever against our data, the businesses can identify some of those ghost numbers and very directly identify the premium rev share numbers. So they can block account creation and block the sending of messages to some of those artificial identities. So that's sort of one of the typical examples of how really sort of authoritative numbering information is being used to deal with a particular type or a couple of particular types of fraud.
Okay, and you touched on it before when you mentioned different countries, but I just wondered what are the challenges involved in keeping up with regulations and rules of different territories and markets?
Well, it's a very interesting position that we have. You know, whilst we act as a kind of channel, it's always difficult to come up with the right words here, but a channel to access that information, also kind of a repository, a place where people can register information about numbers. We're almost acting like a librarian for that data. But you always have to recognize that the data isn't actually ours. So we have to be very aware of the security, privacy, and individual usage agreements of those who really do own or who source the data. In a strange way, we had a bit of an advantage in this market, as at the time when we were setting XConnect and our number information services up, it was around about the time that GDPR was really moving from a discussion item to being more of a regulatory requirement. So right from the start of these services, we've been able to take privacy by design as the approach, right from that development of the services and the sourcing of the data. So national variations, cross-border jurisdiction, data storage locations are more of a kind of business as usual challenge rather than something that we've had to kind of add on or worry about in the later stages of our services.
Okay. And how do you ensure compatibility and easy integration between your system and other business applications or systems?
Sure, it's a funny one. You know, having worked in telecoms my entire working life, most telecom solutions tend to be very, very complicated. Lots of options, lots of software types and so on. But to be honest, these are probably the most simple services I've ever had to work with. Give me a number and I'll get back with a set of attributes. So this is really all based around very simple APIs, using secure internet access. So we can work over public networks, but using VPN technology to secure the data. Now, the other side of it is also working very closely with the platform providers, really the technology providers, who integrate this data or onboard this type of data. So we work very closely with a wide range of platform vendors to allow them to build our data into their solutions.
Okay. And what future plans do you have to drive number information innovation?
Well, there's a very wide range of information that can be provided here. So we kind of look at this as being data sets and number attributes. The question which we're looking at all the time is, what else can I actually tell you about a number that will help a business make particular decisions? So if I give you an example of something we've done recently, we've just added an entire data set which allows you to find out if a number is one way, that it's kind of inbound only, meaning that it's a number you should never expect to see a call coming from, but it is a number that you might go to. So these are typically, they could be free phone the Americans call them toll-free numbers. These would be inbound numbers into enterprises, into business, where they accept their calls in, but you'd never expect to see a call coming out. And people have been using these, again, for hiding behind those numbers, effectively using those numbers fraudulently to look like a number comes from a big business. But that number, in reality, should never technically originate a call. So we're providing a data set that allows those numbers that are one-way only to be identified very easily. A DNO, it's referred to, do not originate list. And that's allowing end users to comply with the regulatory rules which are being introduced in a growing number of countries about really checking the attributes of a particular number. So when we look at this, the attributes and the data sets that we've got plans for all really fall under this general category we've been talking about. Validation is the key thing I've really talked about so far. Routing, I've not mentioned so much, but in the ability to provide information to know where to send traffic, where to send a message, where to send a call. And then thirdly, risk. What is the risk of communicating with that number? So those are really the three things where we're trying to build broad data sets, deep data sets that allow cost optimization and fraud prevention are really the two benefits of where we see these data sets going.
Okay, and just in line with that, are there any other new services that you plan or wish to introduce?
Well, it's kind of interesting to look at, and we see ourselves as a service provider, so I never know whether to talk about these things as being products or services or what. There's a kind of narrow line between all of these when you're talking about effectively a cloud-based service. What we've really talked about so far and where we've built our business is that role of providing access to information about numbers. Hopefully that's been fairly clear from what we've talked about. But this is kind of continuing to develop as we add more data sets and more data sources. But we're also seeing sort of almost a different role in terms of a different service to some of our customers, which are described more as hosting, where it might be their data that they wish to make accessible, or they wish to integrate with other data sets that we might have. So that's kind of one area that we've seen in not just collecting data or aggregating data and making it accessible to people, but also hosting private data, which may then make up part of the service. And that extends on to another area in really offering some of our customers the ability to build their own service, really customized services using our global platform, which you might describe as a managed service. You know, they might have their own data sources. So it might not just be data, it might be sources. And they might want to use some sources which would be different from the sources we would use for exactly that same area. So we kind of really end up with what we're doing today, which is very much access to data sets and those attributes of those data sets. But then that shifts to hosting and integrating customer data sets into our own. And then the third area is in providing managed services, where we're building almost customized services for individual customers. So those are the areas where we're really developing our portfolio of capabilities and working with those very directly with our customers.
Okay, and final question I had, do you foresee any tech developments within your partnerships in the near future?
Well, you know, a partner program is really put in place to support our customers, platform providers. So those platforms will have been chosen by the customers, and our job is very much to help them integrate our data into those solutions. So there's a lot of that partner activity going back on the ground, in the background. It's kind of interesting. You know, the announcements tend to be rather hidden by what each individual customer is doing with their own platform provider. But you know, you may see announcements coming out over this next year concerning new data sets. In particular, I talked about DNO earlier on, and also the availability of our services, being integrated directly into messaging platforms where they're really being offered as a platform. So this whole area of communications platforms as a service, CPaaS, is a strongly growing trend in putting power into the hands of the end user to develop their own services. Well, they need the data as well as the platform. So it's been an interesting development of those relationships to more closely build the data sets and work with the platform providers to ensure that those can be consumed in the easiest possible way.
Okay, great. That's all the questions I had, unless you had any further comments at all.
No, I think it's a very interesting world we live in. Obviously, sort of routing and optimization, cost optimization in the communications world is a key piece. That is so much of what we do. And that includes this whole piece of validating to make sure it actually makes sense to send a message or make a call. That is a key area for us. This area of looking at fraud management kind of spins off into two areas. One is that of regulatory compliance. We're really seeing, particularly in the international environment, that each national regulator is beginning to take a strong interest in what happens for international traffic coming into their jurisdiction. How do they manage? How do they handle that? So using these global data sets rather than just national resources, using a company like us to aggregate all that information from many different sources makes really good sense. And I think, as I said, this area of fraud management splits into the regulatory. It also splits into the area of revenue protection. And I think the example I gave earlier, where we're looking at some of these issues of traffic inflation, and that doesn't just hit the telecoms world. It's not just the carriers or the aggregators and hubs in this world. That's directly impacting some of the large enterprise companies, some of the global sort of hyperscalers that are around. Those are the guys who are being attacked by the fraudsters and who are having to pay for this traffic inflation. So it's interesting for us in seeing our markets broadening out, not just from carriers, application providers, but also moving to the large enterprise, the big tech companies who use messaging a great deal, who use voice communications a great deal, and need to protect themselves from some of these types of fraud. So it's an interesting growing breadth of application that we're seeing.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. And thanks for your time today. If anyone has any questions or comments, then just drop them in the box and hopefully we can get those answered for you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thanks enough. Thanks. Bye.